Okay, thank you very much, Judith. I think this presentation will complement Laura's in a way, because it's looking at what has happened within cities or what will happen within cities after what we've seen. As you said, maybe not going to be post-COVID, but there's going to be changes. And in particular, looking at around innovation, and I guess looking at specifically around the tech sector, which has grown rapidly in a number of cities. And I'm largely going to draw on some data from a survey that we've just undertaken. We just completed it in August, actually, sort of hot off the press. And I'll give you some of the results from that. But what we're coming at really is, I started this project back in 2018, and I visited six big cities around the world: New York, Los Angeles, London, Berlin, Tokyo, and Shanghai. We undertook about 130 interviews. We undertook some field studies there, particularly with what we call innovation agents, and particularly those involved in entrepreneurial innovations. A lot of people, entrepreneurs within co-working spaces, incubators, some of those involved in sort of corporate venturing as well. So try to get a view of what was happening in the city at that point in time. I say in 2018, 2019. I had quite a nice story developing at that point in time, I think, around that. And then suddenly COVID came in and upset the apple cart in a way. So what we've done recently is gone back. We've done a survey of the original 132 people that we interviewed across the six cities. And we've got about 40 odd responses to see what maybe some of the changes they think are going to be in light of COVID. And I'm largely going to talk about those today. But in the paper as a whole, we try to sort of set up this idea of entrepreneurial ecosystems and to draw on the idea that entrepreneurial ecosystems within cities can be seen as complex adaptive systems, which allows us then to look at issues around adaptability, resilience, and the distribution of the networks within these cities and also across cities as well. So given that we've only got 10 minutes, we're not going to run through all of this in terms of complex adaptive systems, but we find it as a useful different tool in terms of trying to conceptualize these ecosystems, entrepreneurial innovation ecosystems, as we call them, within particular cities. So we sort of develop a conceptual framework around that, linking complex adaptive systems with entrepreneurial innovation systems. So again, as I've said, 132 interviews across the six cities back in 2018-19. You can see some of what I mentioned, speaking with entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, the operators of incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, those in universities, as well as policymakers, and also some of the large corporates. So we had that data. I was starting to work with that. And then we went back, did this online survey, did a few interviews before that, just before we framed the survey. And then we sort of just through begging them to respond, we managed to get 46 across the six cities. So we got a reasonable number of responses, which we think we can analyze. We can't really split it down by the city because obviously there's too few observations in a way, but just to get a view across the six. I mean, I chose those six at the outset. I think we just mentioned earlier about San Francisco. That's been researched a lot. These six really as global cities were particularly grown in terms of entrepreneurial innovation, as being tech sectors over the recent period. And originally we wanted to find out in a way is why did they grow? Why was there emergence of these entrepreneurial ecosystems? And it's sort of twofold in a way. One was really coming out from the last financial crisis, where there was quite a big change in terms of large corporations becoming more risk averse, more short-term focused, and maybe less innovative in some ways, particularly in terms of more disruptive innovation. So there seemed to be a switch, particularly in terms of innovation from the public markets more to private markets around venture capital and this more entrepreneurship-driven innovation. And a lot of these actors tend to, for reasons around agglomeration, concentrated themselves in some of these leading cities. So as well as that sort of corporate push, there seems to be almost sort of, to some extent, a linked change amongst individuals, maybe sort of existential change in a way of thinking, a way of not, or particularly young people, not trying to maybe take a job which maybe doesn't exist within a large corporate, but actually to become more involved in innovation, which can be linked to lower cost in terms of entry, with regards to digital technologies, and also the wider availability of co-working spaces and some of this other infrastructure around entrepreneurship. So we can see it's been twofold in terms of changing behavior at the firm level and also individual behavior as well. So that's sort of setting it up. These are some of the results now when we went back in July to undertake this survey, and to say about in terms of the adaptability of these systems, they had grown over that period of time, where they're going to remain more enduring and embedded over time. And we just started asking these respondents, these 46, what they think was mainly going to be the changes around areas such as entrepreneurship, finance, and innovation over the next 5 years. And we've done it on sort of a 5-point scale, and largely in terms around entrepreneurship, tech-based entrepreneurship, finance, open innovation and collaboration. The majority of respondents said there's either going to be no change or there's actually going to be some improvement in terms of the attractiveness of their cities, of these 6 cities. And then again, when we asked them about the impact of new patterns of working, etc., which Laura touched upon in terms of innovation, markets and technology, they said, well, yes, the majority think either there's going to be no change or an actually improvement over the longer term in terms of the ability to undertake different types of innovation, access new markets, and also to develop human capital as well. So it seemed to be, at least from these results, that these ecosystems are possessing some form of adaptability. So we also asked that in terms of some of the changes, there are going to be changes in terms of the uptake and demand for things such as co-working spaces, incubators, space, finance, networking, and also human capital. Yes, around 40% thought there was going to be some reduction in terms of co-working, which makes sense, where we're going to see more of a mix, we think, in terms of hybrid working from on-site as to at home. Demand for innovation is not predicted to seem to be dropped. Networking slightly, and you can imagine different forms maybe of sort of tech meetups, etc. And then demand for human capital remaining strong. In terms of the changes of the innovation within these businesses over the next 5 years, it would seem to be that the majority of these respondents are predicting that there's going to be an increased focus around innovation and change around new products, new processes as a result of COVID, and particularly a refocusing in terms of looking at different types of activities, different types of prospects, etc. So again, there's not going to be a shift away to remaining with the markets, products they have. They're going to continually think at least that they're going to innovate harder in the coming years, over the next 5 years. So how resilient do you think their cities are going to be for these 6 cities? In terms of the overall economic competitiveness, around 40% thought there would be some slight drop, which makes sense, which is a bit like what Laura said in terms of there may be some drop off in terms of the demand for services generally.
1 minute, Robert. Robert, sorry.
How long? 1 minute?
1 minute.
Yeah. But in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship, they think there's going to be continued demand, etc. So again, they think these systems are going to be very adaptive and going to be fairly resilient over time. So we're not going to see a tapering away in terms of these cities acting as bases for these entrepreneurial ecosystems. We think, though, we asked them about whether there's going to be some wider distribution in terms of where these activities are going to be undertaken. And they say, yes, they think second tier cities will grow in terms of their prominence and importance over time. So there'll be some changes in terms of the city innovation network hierarchy. So this data suggests that entrepreneurial ecosystems are going to remain important, particularly within these large cities, and maybe more so within second tier cities. We don't think this is going to be the same and can't be the same in a way of what we're going to see within lagging regions. So, but within the paper, we try to make the argument, obviously, that lagging locations can't imitate what's happening in some of these stronger, particularly global cities, but maybe they can look at some of the processes, and they can seek to nurture similar types of networks on a different level within their own cities. So I think I've run out of time, so I shall leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention.